Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A.IdlePodcast, the podcast where I do weekly book reviews. This week, I've read 5 Types of People Who Can Ruin Your Life, Identifying and Dealing with Narcissists, Sociopaths, and Other High Conflict Personalities by Eddy. Now, this is a piece that explains the detriment of high conflict personalities, and we're going to break that term down more in just a moment. Of course, this is classified as a self-help book, and the intent of this book falls on informing the public on how to deal with a high conflict personality in the least disruptive way. Now, this was released in 2018, published by Tarcher Perigee, which is a Penguin Random House imprint. Now, our author, Eddy, he is a licensed clinical social worker. He's also a lawyer, and we'll see that a lot of his experience with high conflict personalities are mainly legal cases that, he was presiding over. Whether as a lawyer or a mediator, he's also a psychotherapist, and he is the co-founder of High Conflict Institute. So he kind of answers our question within the first chapter of why are you writing this book and why should we listen to you? Because he has experience with this particular topic. Now, when it comes to the structure of this book, it's pretty uniform across each chapter. Each chapter includes one or multiple stories that exemplifies what an HCP is, a high conflict personality. So I'll be using those interchangeably. So just, examples of situations of different cases or scenarios of how high conflict personalities interact with people, and most importantly, how they affect their victims, so you can actually see the situation play out. It also defines the specified type of HCP. And what I like about this book is that there's actually a chapter dedicated to each type, so that we're able to go in depth on the specified characteristics of that given HCP. Now, also how to spot each personality, and that has to do a lot with the WEB method, which we're going to break down in a little bit. How to avoid or handle a specific personality, and that is the CARS method. But also how to break away. So that usually closes out the chapter if you want to end a relationship with someone who has these characteristics and who you suspect is a high conflict personality. How you should get out of that situation, which I think is very important because he's writing about this information for a reason, and that reason is to kind of arm the public against, difficult situations. So you have to know how to get out of a relationship with one of these people. Now, I also want to point out that when we talk about relationship, we're not just talking about romantic relationship. In a lot of these cases, we're talking about professional relationships, whether it's you against a boss or you against a corporation, but it could also be, a friendship, a coworker, obviously a romantic partner, husband, wife, spouse, a parent relationship that came up a few times. And what was the other one I was just thinking of? There's also one specific type of HCP that sees specific organizations or governments specifically against them. And I believe that's the paranoid HCP, which again, we're going to break down in just a moment. But there's various forms of problematic relationships that you can find yourself in with an HCP. Sometimes you're not able to get out of that. For example, if you are working for one, if that's your boss, or if it's your coworker, and a lot of people can't just up and quit their jobs, you have to know how to handle that. So I just wanted to specify that this is not just about personal relationships. Okay. Do. Now, when it comes to validity, so this is something that I personally hold in a very high regard when it comes to especially nonfiction books. Because if I'm reading a book like this, that it's on a topic that I want to know more about, I expect that that information is accurate, but I take it a step further to say what type of information or data or statistics do you have to back up the conclusions that you are drawing. So that's something that automatically I'm always looking for. Or if you're referring to someone else's work, even that's great, because there's a lot of different studies that other people can do, as long as you have something to back up so that it's not just you saying this, then I feel a little bit more comforted as a reader. Of course, you can always take it a step further than that and look up the information on your own. But when it comes to just casual readers or people that are reading, like me, just to find out a little bit more on a topic, I want to ensure that that information is as accurate as it can be. And the way that you do that when it comes to scientific data is that you need to have proven this outside of just you. You know what I mean? So what I found though is that a lot of the statistics, and there are a few in here from the National Institute of Health, NIH, it supports more so of the general personality disorder information that's already out there. And there's a distinction between personality disorder and high conflict personality. And I'm going to define that in just a moment. But the statistics really were only supporting that information. And a lot of that information, a lot of us are already very familiar with it, because these are things that have been researched over decades and decades, and there's all types of information out there about generally personality disorders. What we came here for, though, and what this book is specializing in, is high conflict personalities. And what I found was that when it came to that particular one, it was very speculation heavy. And that's not a bad thing. Really, all that means is that there's no real data points that support the conclusions that Eddy draws on high conflict personalities. That's not to say that, he's wrong. A lot of what he's saying in this book is very logical, and it makes a lot of sense once he explains it. But him just saying, for example, in my experience, XYZ happens when you're dealing with a high conflict personality. Well, that's great. And I trust your experience, but we need something more than that to hold it accurate and true. So I wanted to just put that out there, because I don't want anyone to just run with this, because there's not enough data for me to hold it as very true and very accurate. I think it is though, because as you'll see, as we start getting into the different types of high conflict personalities, you'll see that a lot of this, I think we already inherently know. But yeah. So basically all that to say, we're just relying on the author's estimations, and usually they're from a legal standpoint. So as we know with lawyers and mediators, you're stuck in the middle of dealing with various situations. And I'm not exactly sure what type of law he specializes in, but there's conflict everywhere. Law cases are a big conflict, and he talks about how dealing with specific personalities usually give you an indication that something is wrong or someone is wrong. Okay, so instead of doing themes, because this whole book is a theme on mental illness and mental health awareness, I want to touch on everything that this book establishes. So the first being personality disorder. So that's the general umbrella thing that we're looking at here. And the definition from the DSM-5, which is, I don't have that written out here. Give me one second. DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. That's the 5th edition. So that's where all types of good information is held for mental illnesses. It defines a personality disorder as an enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior that deviates markedly from the expectations of the individual's culture. Basically, you're not acting as everyone else is. That's the dumbed down version. A few key characteristics, not all, but a few key characteristics of personality disorders are interpersonal dysfunction. So there's an issue cultivating and maintaining relationships, a lack of social self-awareness, and a lack of change. Change in the way that they do things, change in the way of, breaking the patterns of dysfunctional relationships, etc. Now, high conflict personalities, which is what we're looking at in this book, HCPs, so they have traits from one or more of, the 5 personality disorders. However, and this is the most important part, they also have a preoccupation with targets of blame. Now, targets of blame is a person or people or a group of people who is the recipient of all of the negative emotions and intentions of a person. And obviously they blame them for everything. So HCPs, not only do they have aspects of personality disorders, they always have someone who they've locked into, who they have decided is to blame for all of their misfortunes. So that's the key difference here. Now, HCPs also have high conflict patterns. So they do the same thing over and over again, and it results in damaged relationships and ongoing feuds. Now, the primary characteristics of HCPs are all or nothing thinking, intense or unmanaged emotions, extreme behaviors or threats, and then also they have the targets of blame. So that's really what this book is about. It's that group of people who have characteristics of personality disorders, but also have this preoccupation with blaming someone or a group of people or whatever may have you. Now, also, targets of blame can change over time. One example that I liked was sometimes if you have someone who moves jobs frequently and they have a history of litigation against companies, so they find something wrong with what their boss is doing or whatever, and then they sue the boss, they sue the company, then they'll go to the next job and do the same exact thing. So they're locking into that idea that whoever is over them professionally, they're out to get them or, something. So, okay, now we're going into the types of HCPs. Now, again, these are not the general personality disorders. These are high conflict personality. So the first one is a narcissistic high conflict personality. These people are charming. They have a superiority complex, but they ultimately end up humiliating their targets of blame, and they have a lack of empathy for their targets of blame as well. Then we have borderline high conflict personalities, and they are unpredictable when it comes to mood. So their moods change very quickly, and they also seek revenge against their targets of blame. Then we have the antisocial, or also known as sociopathic HCP. Now let's stop right there. When I read books about mental health, the word antisocial always gives me like a pause. And that's because in my mind, antisocial means introvert. That's just how I see it. I just see someone that keeps to themselves. But when we're talking about mental disorders, antisocial and sociopathic, which are used interchangeably, it's like an actual disorder. And it's people that, in a sense, they do kind of go against the norm, but they're also very, very off. Let me try to find the actual definition for antisocial. And I should have already had this. Antisocial. And I wanted to point that out because I don't want someone to think that a lot of us kind of label ourselves as antisocial because we don't really like to interact with the world a lot, but that's not a mental disorder. That's just, you like to keep to yourself. Okay, so antisocial or psychopathic, no, not psychopathic, sociopathic, sorry. They are impulsive, irresponsible, and they're often criminals. So these are like people that really like are deprived of like emotions and empathy and things like that. Now these specific types of HCPs are also extremely charismatic, but they have a drive to dominate others. And so, of course, this applies to the targets of blame, but also anyone else in their inner circle. They want to be the dominant ones. They are also remorseless, and they have no conscience. Okay, second to last, paranoid HCPs are deeply suspicious of everyone, and they launch preemptive attacks against targets of blame. So when I think of paranoid HCPs, I'm thinking of the conspiracy theorists that are really deep into, believing that everyone is out to get them specifically. I think that's really the main difference, because a lot of us have fallen down, different rabbit holes and what have you, and a lot of us are suspicious of, what's going on in the world, but these people specifically think that everyone is out to get them. And lastly, histrionic HCPs. These are people that they really exemplify the unmanaged and extreme emotions aspect of an HCP. They often have very dramatic or exciting personalities, but they're essentially just emotionally draining to everyone around them, including their targets of blame. Now, this book also establishes the people around HCPs who unknowingly or knowingly reinforce their behavior, and these are called negative advocates. So these are people that maybe the HCPs have fooled as well into being on their side, and they're all kind of ganging up on you. But it also talks about positive advocates that are essentially allies to support you, that won't feed into the chaos that is bound to happen when you engage in any sort of conflict with an HCP. Now, the most important part that this book discusses, and the reason I think that we're all reading this, is how to deal with these types of people. First of all, in my opinion, before we even get to what Eddy has to say, I wouldn't, because it seems like way too much effort for what reward, because it's not like you're curing them. And from what I understand, again, we don't have as much research, but from what I understand, you can't really cure them. They don't get cured. They don't change their behavior. What was I saying? Oh, so my advice, if you feel like you're dealing with one, I would just like disengage. But obviously we know when it comes to particularly professionally, you can't always do that. So the first piece of advice that Eddy gives us is do not diagnose them to their face. So it may be very clear to you that they are high conflict personalities, and you may even be able to tell what type. You may be able to say, this person is a narcissistic HCP. Do not tell that to them to their face. Each one will have varying levels of response, but the response will always be extreme, and then they're going to consider you a target of blame, and you don't want to be on the receiving end of that because it's essentially relentless in every case. He also says if you don't have to, don't engage, obviously. But when it comes to identifying these people, he gives us the WEB method, which is just assessing the words, emotion, and behavior that the words from the HCP, the emotions that you're feeling, and then the behavior of them, to just like see if something's wrong. And then usually, he also gives us the 90% rule, where it's like if 90% of people would not act the way that they're acting, then there's a great chance that you're dealing with an HCP. So that's kind of like common sense. But then also, lastly, he gives us the CARS method, which is how to communicate with them, essentially, which is care, analyze, respond, and set limits. So, okay, so we've come to the review process. So you know what? I think this book starts a good conversation because I've never heard of high conflict personalities, but I'm very aware of this concept of people who just conflict follows them wherever they go. It's not, it makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of the information is obvious for people that are perceptive as well as introspective. So perceptive is just being able to pick up on what's going on outside of you and different things that are happening with different people. Introspective is being able to assess inside. I think a lot of the times we can obviously spot some of the behavior that is being described here is not okay. And I think a lot of us would just turn away if we don't have to deal with it. In public and stuff, if there's someone acting a fool in public, that's okay. I don't need to deal with it because people are crazy. And that's harsh. People are dealing with a lot. And even for those that don't have HCP, I think that, there's a lot going on and there's a lot of triggers out there. So if you're witnessing something that 90% of people wouldn't do, I think it's best just to not even deal with it. So I think it's, pretty much common sense. Again, it's very speculative when it comes to HCPs. There's not enough statistical evidence for me to support the conclusions, but I think that the conclusions that he makes are very logical. So it makes a lot of sense. Is this a reread? No, there's not enough to pull me in to read it a second time. There's nothing that I really found super groundbreaking that I want to explore more. I would like more research to be done on this specific topic, and then I'll read that book. But yeah, I think the main takeaway is it's best to avoid people that are high conflict personalities. There's too many steps to intentionally deal with someone like this. So that's all. Next week, I will be reviewing The Murder Game. This was, let me not spoil it. It's going to be a good review, though. So that will be next week's review. And after that, I'm not quite sure yet. So we'll see. I will be posting the 40 predictable behaviors of high conflict personalities on the Instagram page. He listed, Bill Eddy listed these in the back of the book. So I'll post those. And other than that, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. I will see you all next week. Thank you.